Hello world, hello LinkedIn Live, hello everybody on this beautiful Star Wars day. For you sci-fi nerds, I apologize, but it is May 4th. May the 4th be with you. My name is Garrett Sussman of iPullRank. I do all this demand generation sort of thing, and I manage it. That's my role. Joined today by some pretty cool dudes. We are going to talk about whether tech SEO is dead. And, as you can see from the title, shut up, tech SEO is not dead. I'm joined today by Michael Glavac of iPullRank and Zach Chahalis of iPullRank. I'll let y'all introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about your SEO background, Michael G.
So going into my 7th year now in SEO. I think, yes, 7 years I can add. Kind of seen it and done a lot of it and just been continually growing, getting deeper into the tech space or tech side of SEO here at iPullRank since I joined in October. Yeah.
And Mr. Chahalis, tell us a little bit about your tech SEO background.
Oh man, I've been primarily focused on tech SEO for the majority of my career, but I've been in the space for over a dozen years at this point. The majority of it focused on technical site migration, structured data implementations, framework opportunities, things like that.
Awesome. So yeah, you guys have both been in there. You've been in the weeds. You've dealt with this stuff. You've seen all the fluctuations of our space. And part of the reason that this LinkedIn live chat came to be, two reasons. First is, for those of you who are watching at home, Michael G wrote a fantastic article all about robots.txt files, whether or not you are, starting out and building one for your site, or you've gone through the nuances of it. You can totally wreck your visibility if you get this wrong. So Michael just broke it down. We'll touch on robots.txt files a little later in the chat. The other reason this came up is last week, Google basically caused a bit of controversy where we have all these different systems that they have. You've got your helpful content system, you've got your review system, and you have this page experience system, which, you expect an algorithm update. It's all focused on, for the most part, core web vitals, among other factors. And Google comes out and they're saying, yeah, so it's not a system anymore. We've kind of baked it into the core update. We've baked it into the helpful content update. It's more of a signal now. And a few folks on the Twitterverse and the LinkedInverse were like, oh, technical SEO is dead. Google doesn't care about page speed anymore. And so we thought we'd kind of discuss that a little bit. Zach, what are your initial thoughts on the page experience system being kind of disintegrated, and does page speed, do core web vitals matter?
Ooh, how long do you have? So yes, it still matters. It's never mattered that extensively. I think that's the thing that a lot of folks don't understand. I think if you look at the weight that site speed and page experience and mobile friendliness had in a lot of cases for any form of SERP or ranking evaluation, it was at best a tie-breaking ranking factor. These are things that are on the smaller scale of things, kind of similar when the HTTP to HTTPS was getting pushed. Like, this is a tiebreaker factor. Now, don't get me wrong, site speed, page experience, all this stuff is extremely important. Whether it's a signal or a ranking system, it is still important. The reason I say that is this goes beyond just your ability to rank for something. If you have a poor site experience, you have a poor speed, load time, mobile experience, those are things that are going to deter your users from coming into your site and staying there and taking any action on it. Because there's an element of SEO that's looking at, hey, I want to get more folks to my site from organic search. Great. Those things are not going to make you go from position 10 to position 1 just by improving your site load time by 30 seconds. But it will result in more people staying on your site and taking more actions where they may not want to otherwise. If your site takes 10 to 15 seconds to load every page, no one really wants to stick around for that type of experience. So yes, this change is maybe a little bit of a shift on the organic search side, but it really shouldn't change how you think about these things from your website and from the overall experience that you're trying to provide to your customers.
Well, to that point, and maybe Michael, you can speak to this. It's like, is the core Web vitals in your minds such an insignificant tiebreaker that page speed should really just purely be a CRO discipline and not even factor into SEO?
It's a tough one. It depends on the metric. And two, like having seen some goofy instances with the page experience scores themselves, where a client's website ran flawlessly, loaded quick, but the mobile page experience score was 0%. And you run through everything, and I'm just like, there's nothing wrong. And it just kept telling me that the elements were too large for the screen. And just randomly one day, I was so angry. I was just like, or I shouldn't say, but we just frustrated. And I just started clicking around like crazy. I had it in mobile view, and I clicked and dragged, and it pulled the whole page over and slid the menu in. I'm like, oh, the menu's loading in off screen. Fix that. Went to a 98% page experience score like a day later. It's when the little nuances like that, I can just, that's where you're like, yeah, I wouldn't see that as the make or break. Be like, oh, there's just some goofy thing where the page menu loads off screen. Like, and it's kind of the little nuances in that where I think it's not as big as people made it out to be, but it's definitely some other stuff like, yeah, I don't want to wait 10, 15 seconds for a page to load. And even you can kind of tie it back to like even like meta descriptions. It's not a ranking factor directly, but if you have a fast site that's not having like shifting issues and taking forever to load images and stuff, people are going to be more active on your site, which is kind of one of those overall, pointing back. Yeah, you're going to have, in theory, have better rankings because your site's got more activity.
Well, so and that also ties into what they were saying about how it's like kind of being baked into the helpful content update. Like, are we dispelling a myth here that like if your site is overloaded with like interstitials and pop-ups and all these page experience things that do lead to a bad experience, like do you think you can have such bad metrics that you will actually be demoted in the rankings? Or do you think it's just a content thing? As long as your content is relevant and quality, despite the user experience, you can still rank highly on page one. Zach?
I mean, look at the sheer number of sites that do, right? I mean, that's the thing. There are a lot of sites out there that perform better than you think that they should, despite everything that they're not doing. To me, I do think those things will matter, but I tend to think about SEO from the start to the finish, right? Like, it's not just getting someone to click on the search result. I do want them to take an action and check out and submit a lead form or convert or whatever it might be. So if let's say I'm talking to a client, hey, I got you to increase from position 7 to position 4 for this keyword that you guys wanted to go after. Cool. What did that do to the number of clicks I got to my site? More specifically, what did that do to my bottom line and my revenue? And, if you're not tying that together, that's where I think it still matters, right? Because the page experience piece is still a component. It is a signal of that, albeit a small one, but I do think it's a signal as a part of that. But then it's just the overall waterfall effect of it. How does it actually impact your business? That's what I think a lot of folks are missing here, on top of the fact that, yes, it is, in essence, a minor signal of a different system. It's just, I don't think folks are thinking about it in the right way.
That's such a good point, because it's like, whether or not it's directly tied to SEO, you still kind of have a responsibility of like, if you are driving traffic to a page on a website and that website doesn't drive revenue or doesn't convert, like, who cares what you're doing for SEO? Like, who cares if you're driving those eyeballs if they're leaving after they're bouncing after a second?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing too. That's why you always want to kind of keep an eye on. That's where I love having an analytics background too. Looking at those page experience metrics, is my bounce rate getting better? If everything is measuring correctly, because bounce rate's a debatable metric half the time. But I mean, if you're looking at it going like, oh, I improve my rankings, I see more sessions coming into the site, but my bounce rate's hovering at 70% on a lead generation page, which really should in theory be closer to maybe a 30 to a 50, 60% range. What are you really doing with that? It's just kind of almost wasting time for folks.
Right. So I do want to get to like the bigger issue though, is like, so we talked about this idea of page speed, meaning that like, oh, since it may or may not just be a tiebreaker, the technical SEO doesn't matter. You should be looking for new jobs. I'm curious if you guys can make that argument of like, what are the aspects of technical SEO that are important to the business? Like, what are the most important things that a technical SEO does, regardless of page speed?
Mike, you want to lead off, or you want me to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to formulate an answer that doesn't make people mad, but
get mad, get us mad.
No, for me, and like thinking before we got started, it's I always felt too, especially when I first got into it, being the other voice in the room with like the dev and the designer, making sure that what they're building for a website like works, because it just feels like everyone doesn't get on the same page. Now, I mean, there's also, we look at, schema markup and how we can get additional signals out to the search engines. I don't see it. I mean, I don't see it dying. It's just evolving like it always does. 15 years ago, some of the first people I worked with bragged about like, oh, we would just place 5 links and we'd be #1 the next day. And that's how easy it was. And like those days are long gone. So it's just always evolving. I think more so. And one of my first directors I work with, she kind of pointed out to me, like, especially if you're going to be a tech SEO, you're going to have to slowly turn into a developer, like, because you're doing more and more on like kind of the back end of the website too, where, hey, I got to make sure all the code is firing all the bits and pieces I need to go out correctly.
Is that true? Do you feel strongly that like you need, because this I hear comes up from time to time in the world of tech SEOs, the extent to which you need to be able to code and what languages in order to do your job effectively? Like, is that even the case?
I don't think you need to know how to code, but
I think it can help to understand the structure of something. I think it helps to understand maybe where to look for something. Where I've always found the most effectiveness in my SEO career is the fact that I can sit in a room with a developer and I can talk to something and I can kind of explain, like, here's what I'm looking to do. Here are some ways that this could be done. Let's talk through what's actually capable. But also the ability of talking to, whether it's an SEO manager or a marketing person or a C-level, someone that may not understand that technical foundation as much, and being able to have the same conversation with them so that they understand it. But to me, I don't think there's a necessity that you have to be able to code. I think maybe you understand a tick more when you have that experience of, all right, how do I set up a server? How do I start to write in HTML? How do I do these things? But as long as you kind of know where to look and know how to think about things, you can still be very effective in technical SEO without being able to code.
And to that point, so like we covered like communication among different departments and being able to be that like, that medium to get the value across to different types of mindsets. What else, Zach? What are some of the other like technical SEO skills that are important besides page speed and being able to help out there?
Yeah. So, I mean, the cheesy analogy I've always used, and I know, Garrett, you love my cheesy analogies, is SEO is kind of like a house in a neighborhood, right? So if you think about everything that's on page, on site SEO, that is essentially the house that you see when you're walking down the street. But that house needs to be on top of something for it to stand and for it to not fall over when the wind blows. That's the foundation. And in my analogy, that is the technical foundation, the technical SEO consideration of the site. You could have the best content in the world, but if that foundation's not there and not crawlable and not accessible, will other search engines see that content, and will it even then get served or indexed at that point? I guess to round out the analogy, the neighborhood itself is kind of the authority piece, the backlinks coming in, the social media presences. Obviously, the stronger that you are from that perspective, the more valuable the neighborhood is, the more valuable your home's value is in that sense. But you need that technical foundation to stand on. So when I'm thinking about technical foundation, that's things like are canonical tags properly implemented? If the page has multiple language or country variations, is hreflang properly done? Are there a lot of response code errors on the site? Are there a lot of pages that just don't work or go through a redirect, for example? Server errors, even more potentially problematic. Internal linking, to me, is both a balance of technical and on-site aspects, but mobile friendliness and site speed do mix into this as well. You want to make sure that that foundation that everything is built on is efficient and is crawlable and is indexable. Because there is the idea of crawl budget and render budget too, right? So if you're spending a lot of time rendering JavaScript, eventually that's going to start to run out of that render budget. If you can improve the performance of that, then you can start to focus more in other areas. You can start to get more attention from search engines on the pages that you do want to focus on. So those things do matter in that sense, but you need that proper foundation for everything to be able to stand.
And to that point, I feel like there's almost like two modes with a lot of technical SEO, and you guys can speak to this, of like the cleaning up what decisions were made in the past, and then making decisions trying to be as future-proof, forward-thinking as possible. How do you think about those sorts of like paradigms when it comes to technical SEO? Like, how much of it is just like cleaning up versus, protecting for the future?
It has to be both. I'll give you an example. So I've worked with clients over time where they've changed up aspects of their site or redone certain page templates, or they're trying to bodge a bodge on a bodge where like, hey, I've got this platform that I've been on for 10 years, but I need to be able to do these new things. And they're trying to shoehorn that into a platform that's not really meant to do it. The side effect of that is you're not able to do it as efficiently or effectively as you want to, and you're inheriting a lot of that technical debt over time. And those are things that are weighing down your ability to optimize the site and perform in its current standing. But at some point, when you do think about replatforming, and everyone at some point should think about either replatforming, updating, redesigning every couple of years because you can take advantage of new technologies. When you go through those things, you have to be aware and be able to fix all of those things. But you want to take advantage of that opportunity in time where you're saying, all right, I'm going to go to the latest version of Sitecore, and I want to take advantage of everything that's here, but I know I'm going to be stuck on this site for at least 5 years. That's your best time to make sure you have time built into your time frame to do all the SEO things that you want done now. Because if you start to bring that tech debt over with you to the new site, you're not going to be able to effectively unwind that quickly, if at all, during the portion of that site. So you start to just keep that stuff permanently. So there's an element of being aware of your past and bringing it forward. Redirects, for example, are a great example of this. If I have URL A that I had in 2012, URL B in 2015, and now I'm going to go to URL C in 2023, I still have to go back and fix those old redirects. I have to be aware of what's going on there. Because if you're removing those redirects or they're going through additional hops now, you're either reducing that authority flow or you're getting rid of it altogether. And you're not able to take advantage of that stuff that you've done in the past.
Mike?
Yeah. I mean, how do I top? No, I totally agree. I mean, it's, I think I'll be honest, for me personally, it's been a lot more in my career has been a lot more fixing than future proofing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think getting people to, getting them to even and then trying to like worry about what's coming next is always the way I've been going. I think not so much with future proofing, but I noticed especially from, I don't know if it's really tech SEO. I mean, it is, but it's a lot of some people. I feel like people come in like, hey, there's this new platform everyone's using. We're going to switch to it. And being that person that goes, but why? Well, everyone else is using it. Like, yeah, but you don't need to use it. Or people doing like really goofy things and trying to balance that line of like, well, this is what you want, so I'm going to be as nice as possible and make this work as best I can.
Well, that comes up so often with like CMSs and like client-side rendering versus, like server-side rendering. And especially in this age of AI, I feel like there's so much shiny object syndrome. So I guess as a tech SEO, there is a lot of this, going back to that relationship aspect of things and talking people off of their ideas. How, like, when a replatforming conversation begins, and Zach, you and I did a whole like webinar around this. Where do you plant your flag when it comes to, making that move? Because to your point, it probably should come up every few years as an SEO. Where do you stick your head in the conversation?
I mean, the second you start hearing the idea of redesigning, replatforming, CMS upgrades, any form of migration, start getting involved and aware and in those conversations, then push. That is the biggest challenge I see is folks get involved too late on the SEO perspective, not to their own fault, but like maybe they're just not aware or the right folks don't know when to pull someone in. So it becomes an issue with that. But you also need to be able to effectively convey concerns, problems, and things like that during the process. I personally like to be involved the second we're talking about kicking off one of these projects, especially when we're talking about a CMS selection or anything along that realm. I've been in this game long enough where every CMS has its own problems and issues from an SEO standpoint, but I start to know which ones have what certain problems. For example, Salesforce Commerce Cloud sites tend to create a lot of content on demandware.store URLs. Cool. Need to make sure we account for that from a canonicalization or no indexing perspective. But a lot of folks don't know that. So this is where like an SEO that's knowledgeable on the technical side can come into that conversation and say, okay, based on who you are, what you're trying to do, what your business model is, here are some CMSs that might work for you guys. And here are some of the considerations that you need to have, because not everything is going to be out of the box perfect when it comes to the SEO side. And you might have to do these things. Back in the day, Sitecore was another good example where Sitecore didn't have built-in pagination functionality back when rel equals next imprev was a thing before Google decided to cut that too. But that was something where, like, if you're going on a Sitecore site and you have pagination, you need to know that you have to build that stuff out. So really you want to get involved with that, but also be able to say, hey guys, this might not be the best idea. I kind of lived through that era of SEO when every developer is like, I want to build an SPA JavaScript framework-based website. Why? And it's like, okay, cool. If that's the route that you guys want to go, that's fine. But I think you need to understand the implications of that for your organic search and everything that you need to do to make sure that Google, Bing, and every other search engine can see your content. And sometimes you can convince them to look at something more effective in that case. Sometimes they want to go with that route. That's fine. But folks need to be aware of the implications of those decisions as they're going through that process, because the last thing you want is 2 weeks from launch kind of going like, hey guys, none of your pages render for search engines. It's going to be like, whatever developer is going to charge you, let's say 80 grand to fix this problem now. No one's happy in that conversation.
Which to that point, I mean, there was a lot of talk, like Michael, you were talking about how so much of your role in the past has been about fixing things. I know, Zach, you've talked a lot about setting up testing environments and setting up the things that testing is ensured. And I imagine that if you have a kind of testing culture, when you do get to the point of like replatforming, that they're going to check to you first. What do you guys think about, like, how do you instill that testing culture into your organization? Like, what have been some of your experiences in the past with that?
I'll let you go, Zach. I've not done a lot of testing. Or been
Okay.
real quick. I will say I've not been in on a lot of the testing. I feel like I've been brought in. Hey, we're going live next week.
Yeah.
Before Zach starts, what was like one of your worst experiences, Michael, where like someone gave you the heads up like way too late, and how'd you handle it?
It was actually a new client. They actually came to us because they launched a new site. Like, hey, we're launching a new site next week. I'm like, okay. And they wouldn't give us access to anything. They launched this new site. They paid for they had a custom JavaScript framework built for the whole site and then fired the developers after the site went live. Nobody on their side knew how to use the website. All the URLs changed. They didn't implement any redirects. So they lost 95% of their traffic overnight. And then their marketing person, because there was a point, I get an email one day. There's like, hey, there's a large influx of 404s. And I'm looking at the URL. I'm like, what's going on? And it took me it ended up being like I had to manually look through the URLs and found it. I found it on one because they were using some weird tagging system to make the URLs to the products. What was happening is the marketing manager didn't know how to edit a page. So they would just make a new one and delete the old one, but they wouldn't redirect it to the new one. Yeah. So that's a great example of not being part of the migration. And when you get brought in late, just everything goes wrong. And I think to that point, like, you get brought in earlier, you can be part of the conversation of like, what are the new URLs going to be? What is what's the reason for the change? Like, and a lot of that could have been avoided. And I mean, seeing a 95% reduction in traffic, I mean, that's when you're an e-commerce site that was doing, they were doing $200,000 a day in sales to like $10,000 overnight. Like, that's going to wake some people up.
Yeah. Just to touch on that point, in an ideal world, I love to be involved in these conversations from the beginning. I've worked with many fantastic clients over the years where it's like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Let's start having conversations. Great. I've also been on sales calls where like, hey, we're launching a new website this afternoon. Can you help us? Like, with what? Fixing the recovery from what you didn't do? So, yeah, I mean, sometimes you're stuck doing a little bit of cleanup or being involved in those things where either you have to have some tough conversations or there's going to be a little bit of an uphill battle to get some of these things fixed and addressed. That's the name of the game when it comes to dev and SEO at this point on the technical side.
Well, that's a tricky thing too, because it's like it is this whole like sunk cost fallacy situation where it's like, are you willing to halt the entire project and just eat up the cost of however much time it takes and like pivot and fix everything before you roll it out, or roll it out, hope you get some revenue in the meantime while also possibly hurting your brand and all these things, and then just fixing it on the fly? And I guess that depends.
It does depend. I don't want to forget about your testing question, but to answer that, it definitely does depend. When I've been in these situations in the past, so I've worked with a retailer. I don't know if any of the folks are on this call, so I'm not going to say a name, not that I would anyway, but I love working with them. That particular retailer, we were talking about going live. We had been in the replatforming project for 18 months at that point. It was kind of a case of like, hey, we've got to get this going live. Okay, but you guys haven't built a couple of your major page templates yet. And that's where you can start to have a conversation with them going, based on what we see here, based on your data, they had good analytics. So we were able to get revenue data, transaction data, and be able to go back and say, if you guys go live now with this, you have to be prepared to lose 50% of every dollar you've gotten from this page template, or 100% of every dollar you've gotten from this one. And here's the cost that you might run into by doing this. You have to be able to have that conversation with them, because there is an element of SEOs crying wolf half the time. And in some cases it's right, but in some cases folks start to think like, all right, you guys are just complaining every time that there's a problem. So the more that you can effectively value the potential problem that's going on there, the more effective you can have that conversation with them to potentially make a change or prevent something from going live that might hurt them.
That's interesting. Because I feel like that also can happen with the marketing, just any arm of marketing, the crying wolf sort of thing. I know I've been on the side of things of like afraid of what could go wrong. And so I feel like as an SEO, like the more mature you are in your career, the more kind of intentional you are with what is brought up versus what you're like, okay, this is not a hill I'm going to die on.
Yes. I mean, as an SEO, I can kind of sit there and go, and this is something I love that we do at iPullRank and the team is very effective at doing. Hey, we see these problems. Here's a prioritization score of the things that are going to be problematic for you and the impact that's going to have whether you do them or don't do them. So I do see a lot of folks just kind of talk about like, oh, you got to do this, 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 and this. Okay, but what's important? Is having all of my canonical tags referencing a URL that doesn't work the same value as all my image alt tags not being filled in? No, and never should be. But a lot of folks kind of present them all without any form of prioritization. And then you start to run into the, oh, well, from a dev perspective, we could probably fix that image alt tag item quicker than we could fix that canonical tag. But we can only do one. So we're going to pick that one because we think it's easier. And then you go live with something that's going to be like detrimental to the site. So yeah, you need to be able to have that conversation, but it's very much an experience thing too.
I was going to say, Michael, as you are going through your career, how are you thinking about prioritization? Like, are you learning? Is it like trial and error? Are you educating yourself? Are you learning from your mentors? How are you thinking about that?
Yes. A little bit. I mean, it's obviously a little bit of everything. I'm definitely fine-tuned my approach with the more people I work with, the more things I see. I definitely feel like a broken record lately talking with people about URL consistency. But I'm slightly baffled, maybe just because I understand the importance of it. But when you kind of explain to people like, hey, or going into a migration, let's say, are you changing the URLs? And they'll be like, yeah, what's the big deal? Well, you have been whatever.com for 8 years. Google knows whatever.com. You're going to change that. You're not starting at zero, but it's a big start. Like you're not at 8 years of being, you're making changes. And I think to Zach's point, and that's one thing I've definitely gotten better at over like, especially the last year, is explaining to clients like, hey, this is going to have not a domino effect per se, but you're stepping back and starting over. And that's if you do it perfect. Like you can do it perfectly, you're still going to take a step back. You screw it up, it's a bigger step back and a longer way forward. And I think starting to push things to like people in dollars and cents instead of like, okay, I'm going to do this thing for you and then we'll do that thing. Borderline to scaring people because, I think when you scare people with you're going to lose money, they tend to listen more, which if you're running an e-commerce site and you change all your URLs, I mean, I've seen it. You're going to lose some money.
Right. And to that point, I mean, there's on the one hand, the fine line between crying wolf as an SEO. On the other hand, if you have to make that call out a bunch of times because a lot of revenue is on the line, then you make that call out each and every time. I do want you to speak, Michael, real quick to your robots.txt blog post because I think it is an important topic that I don't want to forget about that you wrote about. And I wanted to see if there were any like really important call outs that SEO should think about when they do start working with their robots.txt file. If you can kind of give us like a high level.
Yeah, I mean, I think really from my experiences and what I've seen, if anything, keep it I mean, keep it simple, like, and try not to get too fancy in it or use it for what it's not meant to be. Uh, if you don't want certain pages to be crawled, you're better using a no index tag on pages instead of trying to randomly block them out in the robots.txt file. Plus, it's only so big. You can only put so much information in there before Google disregards it or stops reading it. But also, being very, I think too, being very, I don't know, not diligent, but on top of how your robots.txt is set up if you're in a testing phase, because typically when you're testing, you're blocking the whole site. And when it's go live day, make sure you update it to not block the whole site, because that is something I've also seen happen before. And new site goes live and they're like, all right, we're live, and you're like, woo, pop the champagne bottles. And then you get that email from Google, oh, blocked by robots.txt. Like, oops. And then it takes 8 weeks to get half the website crawled and indexed.
So that I do want to double back to the idea of testing at some point, but that's also where testing can come into play, depending on how you want to define testing. Because there is the idea of stress testing and regression testing in SEO that needs to exist and really should be heavily thought about by folks on the technical side, because there is that one step forward, two step back mentality, right? You might make a code change that fixes something, but in theory, it breaks something else that you don't know about unless you have those systems or some form of checklist process in place. A good example, I was golfing with a buddy one day, was working with a client, and back in the day, they would just take their production and their staging servers and swap them every time that they wanted to push code live. But the robots.txt files would go with it. And normally 99% of the time, they'd be very good at remembering to fix that. But I caught them once doing it. And then I built an automated testing system that said, all right, let me check the robots.txt file. And I remember I was golfing on a day off, about to tee off on the 18th hole, and I get a text message alert like, oh, such and such site, which was a Fortune 100 company, blocked their entire site through robots.txt file. And you're sitting there going like, I got to make a phone call real quick, because if they don't get this resolved and Google starts hitting it and removing the site from index, you're talking about weeks, if not months of recovery for something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the thing, is like you heard about these stories where it's like a few hour thing and you're able to recover quickly. But like I think John Mueller wrote, like the longer that you let this go, the more that Google realizes it's not an accident, and then you see those penalties.
Yeah, this particular issue would have been when early teens, so where things were less effective at that. But now, yeah, there's certainly a case of the more Google sees something, the more it understands, okay, this is how it's going to be. You can kind of get away for a week or two of a site change with some problems. It's after that point when Google scrolled the site several times, if not several dozen times, depending on the size of your site, that they start to see, okay, you guys are not fixing this. This is what we're dealing with. As a result, here's how we're going to see you.
And one thing I'm curious about, starting to talk a little future thinking and the future of technical SEO. At iPullRank, we've been talking a lot about AI generative content and the internet being flooded with content. I'm curious your guys' take, because one big component about technical SEO is getting your website crawled, getting your website indexed. With all of this new content flooding, do you see Google starting to handle crawling and indexing differently? And as a technical SEO, how would you think about that?
I mean, I feel like they already have, because it's definitely documented they've been crawling less over the last few years. I think it goes to that point of they're going to hit a page, crawl it a week later, crawl it a week later. And I don't know how many times they come through. It's like, oh, this hasn't changed. And they're going to start pushing it back, and they're going to start finding that, they're definitely going to find the spot where you're updating, where you're making changes, and prioritize crawls through websites. I think with the flood of new content, And this has been the thing, like I kind of been jokingly saying that I'm excited for this year just to see what happens. But yeah, I mean, everyone's going to be pushing the same article written a different way. But also, and just from, can't speak for everyone here, but just things I really notice when I look at back to the crying wolf and, the sky is falling mentality on some things. I don't like examples that are getting pushed right now, honestly, because they're too big and they're too vague. Like they're not real good, especially with like AI search, before without the content, like the search part. I keep it. Somebody show me somebody buying some niche B2B service or product. Show me that, and then I'll get scared that my job's gone or something. Like, but it's not there. Nobody's shown me like start to finish someone, because I still think right now, especially with niche products, everybody knows everybody still. You're not, if you need a certain product, you're not, I always laugh. It's like, I'm not searching how, to point back to that I just have burned in my brain, torque transducers. I'm not like, if I need that, I know how it works. I don't need an article that tells me how it works because I know what it does and I know how it works. I think that kind of content, I think it's going to hurt the affiliate side of marketing because that's kind of where you see that big flood of, content like that. Not going to lie, trying my own site. That's all AI articles right now. Just see what happens, for laughs. I'm not looking to make money off of it, just more so for my own fun and pleasure and see what goes on. But I think Google's going to they're going to really hone in their crawling. And I think if they hit sites that are like, all right, this site just added 10,000 articles in the last week. Yeah, I'm not crawling them all. Like, I think they're going to figure it out. Everyone likes to say Google's dumb, but they're not. They can't do everything, obviously, but they're a lot smarter than people want to give them credit for. And I think they're going to figure it out fast enough. If not already, probably have it figured out, really, and just kind of keeping it to themselves.
Zach, you're nodding.
Oh, yeah. There's so much going on with that. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, so I've worked with brands where like they didn't publish a ton of content, but they suddenly decided, and this was handwritten content, I'm going to say, let's say, but they decided, hey, we're going to add 200 pages of content. Cool. You're a 150-page website, and you're going to add 200 pages of content in one day. And then I'm getting emails going like, hey, none of this new content we created is getting indexed. Like, I'm not surprised. I mean, let's work on fixing it. But like, you've now just doubled your site and exceeded, I hate talking about crawl budget with small websites, but I mean, still, when you're doubling your site like that, it's an issue. Now the AI content thing is very fascinating to me because there's the idea of information gain out there, right? So all of these tools are trained on similar data without a ton of information that is unique. Let's look at ChatGPT, where it's based through the end of 2021, based on the data that's out there. And if everyone is then using ChatGPT to write a new piece of content for them, at what point does it start to look like every other piece of content? And then everyone's doing the same thing, and you're all playing catch up, and you're all doing the exact same article, and you've got, let's say, 1,000 words of content, but they're all the same. Google's going to start to reward the idea of folks that are adding unique value, that are adding differentiation to it. Does that then cause a repeating cycle of then scraping that content and rewriting it and having to do the same thing over again? Probably. But that's something where folks can start to set themselves apart. There's a great analogy that I've always kind of liked. There's a series on Disney Plus about the creation of the theme parks. The Imagineering story, I think.
Love that. Love that series.
Great series. But there's a point in there where all the animators are freaking out because they're afraid that their jobs are going to get replaced from, creating the rides or making the movies or the TV shows by an animator's box, essentially a piece of technology. and this is just one example. There's multiple of these throughout the course of history. But in this case, it's like once folks realize, oh, I can use this tool to do my job maybe a little bit easier. It's not going to replace me. It just allows me to be more effective so I can focus my time elsewhere. I think that's where a lot of folks are not necessarily thinking about AI in the right sense from a technical perspective is it can help you do things potentially more efficiently, but someone still needs to feed this. And there's still a very big element of prompt engineering that needs to be done in order for these things to work correctly. Take structured data. I can use AI to write a structured data script. I'm a big schema fan. But without the right prompt, something that it might give me for organization schema, I might think is a piece of trash. It's really subjective in that sense, but it's a tool in my toolkit that I can use to do my job better potentially.
I completely agree with a lot of what you're saying. I feel like there are these technologies. The tough thing is going to be being able to predict what they look like in a year. Like, when we see things like, to your point about, right now they're limited to 2021. But if they're able to, if you, once you start using your own documentation or like, be able to interview people and take that, multimodal content and incorporate that into it, I think that does start to change the game. And then there is this conversation around this Project Magi stuff, which we don't know how Google is going to implement it. And I think Michael makes a great point of like, Google's not dumb, but I think it's easy. It's hard to not overestimate Google's capabilities and underestimate Google's capabilities because it is really this big black box. I think it's going to be interesting over the next couple of years of how it will evolve because it needs to with these LLMs. But I think to your guys' point, the critical thinking of a technical SEO is not going to be replaced by any of these AI tools in the immediate future. And even so, over the next few years, I feel like it's not going to be close. Do you guys have any kind of final thoughts, Michael, if you want to go there as we kind of wrap up this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it's not perfect either. It's fascinating for sure. And it's cool what it can do. It's not good yet, honestly. Like when you really like, sure, I'd be lying if I said I haven't seen some great content get created with stuff we're doing here at iPullRank. That said, some of it is kind of like fluff, if you will, like, but you can get it to write well on basic things. I think when you try and get more advanced with it, it falls apart. It makes up facts, gets them wrong. Especially like on the coding side of things, I've been messing around like, hey, I need some code to do X, Y, and Z. And it spits something out and you go run it and it's like, this doesn't work. And you get error messages and you're like, all right, well, this is incorrect. So it's not perfect yet. And I think the best way I heard it explained right now, back to with like people like, oh, Google's losing to Chat GPT and OpenAI and Microsoft. No, I think OpenAI made Chat GPT and Mike's rankable. When it's like, oh yeah, OpenAI just said YOLO and threw Chat GPT out to the world to see what would happen. And I honestly think that was more so what it was than anything else. And now, let's be honest, like an industry has evolved from it in a short couple months. I think personally, I've joked with Zach that it's starting to turn into like the next voice search, the whole AI search component of things. We'll see. But I think as far as like AI tools and something I was thinking of after more so on the tech side, I think, I think people are going to be bloating their websites with tools. Because that's always, I think of WordPress sites, and you go on a WordPress site and you're like, whew, you have 82 plugins. 8 of them do the same thing. Let's start deleting them. But, I think that's going to be, so I think this next year is going to be interesting where people are going to start throwing things into their website, auto-generating content on the fly. And I can't remember if Mike said it in a meeting or an article where he's like, we're going to turn into chatbots talking to chatbots real soon. And then human writers will be valuable again. Just all come full circle.
Zach, what do you think? What are your final kind of thoughts as we wrap this up?
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts. I do think it's going to continue to get better over time, right? We do continue to see this, but it's always going to have some element of oversight or guidance that needs to exist, right? We hear folks talk about the idea that AI, ChatGPT, LLMs, NLG, it's all going to replace our jobs. Okay. But someone has to write all of these prompts. Someone has to create all of this. It has to be based on something, right? You still have to have someone that has an understanding of technical SEO or just SEO in general that's driving how these things are generating what you're asking it to generate, right? If you don't know that you need to redirect your URLs, you may not know that it can create rewrite rules for you, and you might not think about that. So I've seen people ask it like, "Oh, what are the best things to do for SEO to improve my website?" Like, all right, that's a very basic list. That's not going to replace someone with a skill set that has been doing this for many years that can kind of go, all right, but have you thought about this? I mean, what about this aspect of your site that's in multiple different languages? How are you going to know to implement hreflang tags when it's kind of a niche topic, right? Not every site has multiple languages or countries. I think maybe only a handful of the ones that we're currently working with do, but I've seen plenty over the years. If you don't know anything about that, then it's kind of garbage in, garbage out, right? The AI can only be so good in that sense. So to me, no, technical SEO is far from dead. Does it maybe allow us to do our jobs more efficiently? Yeah, potentially. And we spend our time doing something else instead. But there's still going to need to be things that get done by a human in this, at least in the very foreseeable future.
I think that's a great place for us to kind of stop with this, because I do agree with you. It's like, I think the theme that we've learned from this whole conversation is the responsibility of tech SEOs as a really important QA in an organization, whether it's with people or with AI tools. It's like your experience, your knowledge, your understanding of the potential consequences from decisions that others might not think impact your search visibility is a responsibility for the tech SEO and for any SEO to step in and say, hey, you might not know about this context, but you need to know about this. And it's the same with the AI, is like, to Zach's point, providing the context in the prompt, because we always joke about how the SEO industry is so much, any advice is around that it depends. Well, the it depends requires your understanding of the context and to share that with humans and AIs alike, before we start giving AIs a little more sort of, responsibility in running our websites. Thank you guys so much for hopping on this LinkedIn Live. I think, for those of us who aren't as into tech SEO, like, I get it. It's still really important, and for us, the three of us can like geek out about this stuff, and we see how important it is to the health of a business. Like the title of this LinkedIn Live, shut up. Technical SEO is not dead. It is really important. Thank you everyone for joining us. If you do want to get in touch with us, once again, we're at iPullRank.com. Michael G, Zach Chahalis, myself, Garrett Sussman. You can find all of us on the LinkedIns, on the Twitters. We're always open to have conversations. Even if you want to join Zach's ATL SEO community, if you're in the Atlanta area, they're talking Slack all the time. Thank you again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day. May the 4th be with you and all that jazz. Any final last thought? If you had to give one piece of advice, Michael G, to the good people on LinkedIn, what would you say about tech
SEO? Keep it simple.
There you go. Zach, last piece of info.
I actually do like keep it simple, but also, ask questions and continue to learn and know that things are not going to stay the same.
There you go. And I'd be remiss, we didn't even talk that much structured data. So if you're interested in hearing more about Michael G and Zach, they have both been on the Rankable. We have great episodes of them in the past. I've had Zach on a few different webinars. So a lot of great content on the iPullRank site. We'll catch you later. Have a good one. Peace out.